Guys, I'm here to get into my 9 favorite films directed by Stanley Kubrick. And Stanley Kubrick's visual storytelling, just his general exploration of just kind of simplification and soothing way of complexity, just makes for one of the most disturbing, timeless display of close-up montage sequences throughout his filmography, with just all sorts of unforgettable composition. Kubrick films just often feel like they're just layered with symbolism, and just they're really, really subtle. And they just always increasingly reveal themselves with age as just perhaps some of the most subtly humanistic displays in a filmography that I've ever seen. I think Kubrick's just one of the most important directors. I mean, of all, just right next to like Paul, except for Paul Thomas Anderson, David Lynch, and Martin Scorsese. Um, and I remember I have The Killing, which is just a perfect display of just gradually going insane. I think this is a perfect crime film from start to finish, which gets into a really complex sort of heist depiction, and it's told with simplification around just a perfect display of characterization, directing, and pacing. And the heist strongly foreshadows elements of like Quentin Tarantino. It just makes for timeless, memorable viewing from start to finish. And then it has a glory, which is an ultimate criticism of military values. This is just a mesmerizing depiction of just emotional devastation from a completely raw sort of perspective. Stanley Kubrick's confidence at directing a display is just particularly stunning. And then Full Metal Jacket's number 7, and I guess is an ultimate depiction of dehumanization. And it's the first Stanley Kubrick project I'd ever seen, and this holds up as more mesmerizing than ever before. It's Billy Wilder's favorite Stanley Kubrick film, which completely adds up in a lot of ways. This is just a completely wild sort of immersion into what holds up as an original balance of kind of like dark comedy and extremely depressing kind of like arts in a lot of ways. Number 6, I have Clockwork Orange, which is a real bold, kind of just a raw depiction of just bold risk-taking, experimentation. And this is my favorite Stanley Kubrick project growing up, although I spent so much time with it now that I prefer the more subtle shades of his films to follow it, getting across a lot of similar themes. Like, this is a mesmerizing sort of punk depiction at raw display. Malcolm McDowell is particularly frightening because he just ingrains this perfect personality inside some of the most villainous deeds to have ever been portrayed. And Kubrick just has this full display where the momentum strangely slows down a little more upon every act. And I've always really enjoyed how that makes this particularly trance-inducing and perhaps the most close-up depiction of a psychopath to have ever existed. It's been my favorite film. I had a lot of faces growing up where this is like my number 1 favorite film of all time. And there were a lot of spans this has just influenced in so many layers. And then number 5, I have Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which is just an ultimate satirical perspective. Kubrick's in a full-on satirical mood, and this holds up as an extremely original note of distinctive comedy at display, which is the final moment that Kubrick would display his comedy roots before going into his hyper-stated perfectionism to a maddening yet endlessly influential extent. And it's quite transcendental filmmaking, ultimately, as every character is hilarious. And this is one of the most insane and dark sort of portrayals I've ever seen. The screenplay is comedic in value from start to finish, and it's a really unpredictable sort of display of madness unfolding. And I think this perfectly gets into all sorts of just brilliantly over-the-top sort of characterization by Kubrick's original element. And number 4, I have Barry Lyndon, which is just the perfect display of being on a quest of meaning in life, and holds up as a mesmerizing display of lighting and the ultimate project of just kind of guiding, just you could say in a lot of ways, admiring beatitude and simplicity in nature, which Stanley Kubrick conveys to such a mesmerizing extent within a complex sort of character study. And it's a groundbreaking display, which has spawned out of intense brainstorming of Napoleon's story for so many years. And it turns out to be a mesmerizing visual display, which holds up as my favorite cinematography display of naturalism of all time, perhaps. It's also just one of Kubrick's most subtle projects all around. Pacing's perfect, and it flows soothing as a river, getting across a timeless sort of momentum, which is just strangely calming and disturbing at the same time. The influence of this only gets better upon every rewatch, and it feels like Kubrick's utterly is just full on display after the raw energy of A Clockwork Orange. And The Shining is an ultimate display of experimental display, and this is perhaps the greatest horror film I've ever seen, right along the lines of David Lynch. And it's just a mesmerizing display of having telekinetic abilities yet against dominated by evil forces. And I really admire Stanley Kubrick's subtle display of humanism, which often goes unsaid based on the cruelty that kind of is said to go on with his connection with Shelley Duvall and working on all this. And this project ultimately just gets across this level that reminds me a lot of immersion into the mind of just a rock star losing his mind. And I feel like Jack Nicholson's portraying one of the most insane, subtly hilarious villains I've ever seen. It's essentially crazy right from the beginning, and it just feels downright loud as he's kind of increasingly snapping and all this. And number 2, I got Eyes Wide Shut, which is kind of just his ultimate statement, really. I feel like this is the most subtle Kubrick project and some of the most greatest lighting of display I've ever seen. I feel like it perfectly upgrades the naturalism of Barry Lyndon's lighting into a thriller perspective. And the disturbing elements of The Shining are more subtle here, but yet it's perhaps the most frightening film Kubrick made. And As Tom Cruise's tie with Keira Duella is my favorite Stanley Kubrick characters, there's distinctive technical perfectionism that's full display. Feels like the thriller shade kind of just ends up a lot like resonating really well with like Lynch's originality, which I know that was a huge influence in making The Shining, and it feels like this as well. And number one, I feel, doesn't want a Space Odyssey, which is an ultimate take on Kubrick's distant detachment of storytelling, and I think it's the most groundbreaking film ever made, and holds up as just my favorite film ever made.